will never forget that day. As I stood at my parents' funeral, both of them lowered into the ground side by side, my husband of 20 years leaned in. His breath was cold, his words colder. I want a divorce. At their funeral, while I was burying the two people who raised me, the man who promised to stand beside me for life decided it was the perfect moment to crush me. But here's what he never saw coming. I don't break. Not for him. Not for anyone. Weeks later, the same man who whispered those words at the graveside, the same man who thought he could walk away scot-free, was standing in handcuffs, stripped of everything he valued: his career, his fortune, his freedom. And it was me who made sure he had nothing left. This is the true story of how ordinary life turned into a battlefield, how betrayal became fuel, and how one woman, grieving, enraged, determined, set a trap that no one could escape. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Who was Daniel Hayes, really? To the outside world, he was everything a man was supposed to be. Sharp suits, polished speeches, the kind of lawyer who could walk into any boardroom and command respect without saying more than a few words. He built his image carefully, never a hair out of place, never a story told without purpose. His neighbors saw a successful husband, his colleagues saw a rising star, and even his in-laws once believed he was the perfect son-in-law. But beneath that calm exterior, what sort of man whispers divorce into his wife's ear while her parents are being lowered into the ground? What sort of man calculates that the moment of her greatest grief is the best time to strike? Why would Daniel Hayes, who had built his reputation on composure and timing, choose that particular moment to reveal his betrayal? And what he never anticipated was that Caroline Hayes, the grieving daughter he thought too broken to fight, would become his greatest undoing. Because while he smiled for photographs with his mistress, while he thought he was covering his tracks with secret accounts and quiet transfers, Caroline was watching, learning, and waiting. She would turn his arrogance into evidence, his deception into justice, and his schemes into the very noose that would one day hang his career. The questions remain. Who was Daniel Hayes beneath the mask? Why did he dare to break Caroline at her parents' funeral? And how did she, a woman left standing in the rain with 3 children and no partner, manage to turn the man she once trusted into the man the courts would condemn? Caroline Hayes had once believed her life was the kind of story young women dreamed about. Fresh out of her graduate program in counseling, she was full of energy, ambition, and a deep desire to help people. She wanted to open her own practice one day, maybe write a book about family therapy, maybe even teach. Then she met Daniel Hayes. He was already making a name for himself at Mitchell Royce, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. He had that kind of presence that made people lean in when he spoke, that quiet confidence that suggested he always had a plan and always knew more than anyone else in the room. In those early days, Daniel was charming, attentive, and convincing. He told Caroline she was unlike anyone he had ever met, that she listened when others only wanted to talk about themselves, that she made him feel grounded. Caroline believed him. She thought she had found a partner who valued her heart as much as her mind. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony where Caroline's parents cried tears of joy, proud to see their daughter in the arms of a man who promised to protect her. In the beginning, those promises felt real. They bought a modest home, Caroline decorated every corner with love, and Daniel worked hard at the firm while Caroline adjusted to life as a new mother when their first child was born. Soon after came their second, and then, unexpectedly, their third. Caroline gave up her career in counseling to raise their children, a sacrifice she told herself was temporary but soon became permanent. Daniel encouraged her at first, telling her a mother's love couldn't be replaced. He made it sound like devotion, as if he truly believed the children needed her more than anything. But slowly, those words of admiration turned into dismissive remarks, like cracks forming in what once seemed like unbreakable glass. At first, it was little things. A sigh when dinner wasn't to his liking, an irritated glance when the children laughed too loudly during his late-night calls. Then, as the years pressed on, those cracks grew deeper. Caroline noticed the compliments stopped. She noticed that birthdays and anniversaries became dates Daniel often forgot, explained away with excuses about late meetings or important clients. The warmth she had once felt in their home cooled into something heavy, something silent. The house that had once been filled with laughter started to sound more like an office, orderly, stiff, emotionless. The children noticed too. Their oldest, sensitive and observant, started closing her bedroom door more often, retreating into her own world. Their son threw himself into sports, eager for anything that kept him away from the tense silence at the dinner table. Their youngest, far too young to carry the weight of adult tension, began waking at night with bad dreams, whispering fears about their father's anger. Caroline tried to reassure them, tried to smooth over the cracks with the same patience she had once used in counseling sessions. But deep down, she knew something was slipping away. Caroline told herself it was stress. Daniel's work was demanding after all. He was chasing partnership at Mitchell Royce, and the competition was cutthroat. She made excuses for his absence, for his dismissiveness, for the way he looked past her as though she was fading from the picture of his life. She convinced herself that if she just held on, if she just waited a little longer, the man she had once known, the man who made promises under a white arch while her father walked her down the aisle, would return. She thought he was tired. She thought stress made him cruel. She didn't know he had already chosen another life, one that did not include her. The day of the funeral should have been about loss, about honoring the two people who had shaped Caroline Hayes into the woman she had become. The rain had not stopped for days, and as family and friends gathered under black umbrellas, the sky itself seemed to echo her grief. Caroline stood at the front, her children pressed tightly against her sides, their small hands clutching at her dress, as if afraid she would vanish with the grandparents they were about to bury. Her heart was already in pieces. Her parents had been her foundation, the quiet strength she leaned on when the world felt heavy. Now, as the caskets were lowered into the ground side by side, she felt a hollow silence inside her that no words could fill. It was in that silence that Daniel Hayes leaned in. His breath brushed against her ear, his voice lower than the murmur of prayers around them. "I want a divorce," he said, each word clipped and calculated, landing like a blade driven straight into her chest. Caroline froze. For a moment she thought grief had made her mishear him, but then she turned and saw his face. Not sorrowful, not pained, but flat, cold, impatient, as if the burial of her parents was nothing more than an inconvenience standing between him and the next item on his schedule. Her knees threatened to buckle, and she gripped her daughter's hand harder, afraid she might collapse in front of everyone. Her children looked up at her with wide, confused eyes, sensing something had shifted in that moment, though they couldn't possibly understand the cruelty of what had just been whispered. Caroline wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but Daniel was already stepping away, smoothing his tie and extending a hand to one of her uncles, offering a polite smile as if nothing at all had happened. That was when it struck her. This was not grief talking. This was not a man overcome with the weight of death and loss. This was calculation. Daniel had chosen this moment with precision. He had waited until her parents were gone, until she was drowning in sorrow, surrounded by mourners and clinging children, too weak to fight back, too broken to argue. He had orchestrated this unveiling of betrayal at the exact moment he believed she was at her lowest. It was not a slip of the tongue. It was strategy. Caroline stood there, numb, the sound of shovels beginning to cover the caskets with wet soil mixing with the pounding of her own heart. Every condolence offered to her blurred into meaningless noise. All she could hear was Daniel's voice echoing in her head, cold and final. She realized in that moment that the man she had once believed in, the man she had defended, the man she had excused for years, was not standing beside her as a partner. He was standing beside her as an adversary who believed the battlefield was already his. But Daniel Hayes made one mistake. He underestimated the woman he was trying to break. He forgot that her parents had not raised her to crumble in the face of cruelty. And what he could never have predicted was that their death, as devastating as it was, would reveal a secret weapon he had no idea existed. The days following the funeral were a blur for Caroline Hayes. Grief pressed against her chest like a weight she could not push away. Yet Daniel's words at the graveside burned in her mind louder than any eulogy. She moved through her home like a shadow, cooking meals she could not eat, tucking her children into bed while trying to hide the storm inside her. But as the condolences faded and the phone stopped ringing, Caroline discovered something she had not expected. A small envelope her late mother had left for her, tucked neatly inside a drawer of the old desk that had been brought over from her parents' house. Her mother's handwriting was instantly recognizable, steady and deliberate, as if she had known her daughter would one day need strength from beyond the grave. Inside the envelope was a letter, short but powerful, and a single brass key. The words were simple. Caroline, if you are reading this, then life has given you a burden you should never have to bear. Take this key to First National Bank. What you find there will guide you. Confused and trembling, Caroline drove to the bank 2 days later, the key clutched tightly in her hand. She was led into a quiet room where a safety deposit box was placed before her. As she turned the key and lifted the lid, her breath caught. Neatly stacked inside were photographs, documents, and receipts, evidence her mother must have quietly collected over the years, perhaps suspecting what Caroline had been too trusting to see. The first photo made Caroline's heart sink. Daniel Hayes, unmistakable in his tailored suit, smiling with his arm around a younger woman. That woman was Vanessa Clarke, a junior associate at his firm. Picture after picture told the same story. Weekends in Aspen, dinners in expensive restaurants, hotel room doors closing behind them. Caroline's hands trembled as she shuffled through the stack, each image cutting deeper than the last. Then came the receipts. A bracelet costing $200, charged to their joint account, never once given to her. A weekend getaway in Aspen, again under their finances, though she had never stepped foot there. Bank transfers in amounts that made her stomach churn. Money siphoned not from his own salary but from the children's college funds, carefully disguised as investments. Caroline's tears blurred the ink, her chest tightening with both rage and sorrow. This was not just betrayal of a marriage. This was betrayal of their family's future. Determined to understand the full scope of what she was holding, Caroline reached out to Ryan Cole, a private investigator recommended quietly by an old friend of her parents. Ryan was discreet, sharp-eyed, and relentless. Within weeks, he had pieced together a damning portrait of Daniel's double life. It turned out Daniel's affair with Vanessa Clarke had stretched on for years, hidden beneath business trips and late nights at the office. But worse, Daniel had been siphoning money not only from his family but also from his clients at Mitchell Royce. Embezzlement, fraud, betrayal layered upon betrayal. He had used client trust funds to bankroll his luxury lifestyle with Vanessa, keeping the lies carefully balanced until Caroline's mother, suspicious, had started gathering proof. Ryan Cole placed photo after photo in front of Caroline. Daniel and Vanessa laughing in restaurants, holding hands at airports, embracing in hotel lobbies. He showed her the bank statements, the altered client accounts, the shadow trail of money that led straight to Daniel's so-called future. Every document was a dagger, but together they became a shield. Caroline was no longer just a grieving widow's daughter or a betrayed wife. She was holding the kind of evidence that could ruin Daniel Hayes entirely. And that was when the realization came, cold and clear. Daniel Hayes wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a criminal. And now Caroline had proof. Ryan Cole's investigation had given Caroline Hayes a foundation of truth, but what he uncovered next shifted the ground beneath her entirely. Daniel Hayes hadn't just been funneling money to keep Vanessa Clarke comfortable. He had been building a future with her, one carefully constructed from lies and theft. Documents showed corporate filings under preparation, phone records revealed secret calls, and quiet whispers from inside Mitchell Royce confirmed it. Daniel and Vanessa were planning to launch a new firm together, Clarke Hayes. To the public, it would look like an ambitious new chapter. Behind the curtain, it was built with stolen clients, stolen funds, and stolen trust. Daniel had used Mitchell Royce's name to win cases, then whispered promises to his clients about better rates once he and Vanessa went independent. He was draining the very firm that had made his reputation, setting the stage for a betrayal that would leave his colleagues blindsided. For Caroline, the betrayal cut deeper than ever. She had sacrificed her career to raise their family, believing Daniel when he said he was building something for all of them. Now she could see what he had really been building, a life that did not include her, or their children, or even a trace of the loyalty he had once sworn. Vanessa Clarke was not just a mistress, she was his business partner, his co-conspirator, the co-author of a new empire Daniel intended to write Caroline out of completely. Caroline knew she needed more than anger. She needed strategy. That was when she turned to Linda Harper, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being ruthless and unrelenting. Linda was known in legal circles as the kind of woman who never flinched in court, who could turn a case upside down with nothing more than a stack of papers and a razor-sharp tongue. Caroline walked into her office with Ryan Cole's files, her mother's evidence, and a story that Linda listened to without interruption. When Caroline finished, Linda's response was simple. If he wants war, we'll give him war. The plan was simple in appearance, but devastating in execution. Caroline would play the part Daniel expected, the grieving widow's daughter, the heartbroken wife too fragile to stand on her own. She would let him believe his cruelty had broken her, that his whisper at the funeral had shattered her spirit. Daniel would continue his charade, smug in the belief that he had outmaneuvered her. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Caroline and Linda were preparing a legal and personal strike strong enough to destroy every piece of Daniel's carefully crafted world. The day Clarke Hayes opened its doors, cameras flashed, hands shook, and Vanessa Clarke stood proudly beside Daniel, smiling for the reporters who celebrated the rise of a new legal powerhouse. To outsiders, it looked like the beginning of a triumphant story. But Caroline watched quietly, calm and steady, her voice carrying the truth only she knew. He thought the new chapter had begun, she would later say. He had no idea I was about to end the story for good. Daniel Hayes thought he was free. But freedom was the first thing Caroline Hayes planned to take from him. The day Caroline Hayes unleashed the truth was the day Daniel Hayes' world began to collapse in on itself. For weeks, he had walked through life with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He strutted into Clarke Hayes with Vanessa Clarke at his side, parading her not just as a colleague but as proof that he had moved on. To everyone watching, he looked untouchable. But behind that smug smile, Caroline had been quietly weaving a net, and now it was time to tighten it around him until he could not breathe. The strike was surgical. Linda Harper filed a divorce countersuit that not only demanded an end to the marriage, but also sought full custody of the children. The evidence was ironclad: years of infidelity, financial betrayal, and reckless disregard for his family's well-being. At the same time, Caroline and Linda submitted a formal ethics complaint to the state bar, attaching documents from Ryan Cole's investigation that showed Daniel had siphoned client funds. The same morning, criminal referrals were delivered to federal investigators, outlining a pattern of fraud and embezzlement that reached far beyond the household accounts. And Caroline didn't stop there. She made sure the truth wasn't hidden in court files alone. The media received anonymous packages containing photographs of Daniel and Vanessa, receipts for luxury gifts and secret trips, and documents proving the theft of client trust funds. Headlines began to appear almost overnight. Prominent attorney under investigation for fraud. Law firm betrayal. Clarke Hayes accused of stealing clients. By the time Daniel arrived at his new office, the whispers had already spread through the legal community. That was when he was served. In front of his clients, his staff, and Vanessa herself, process servers handed Daniel Hayes a thick stack of papers: divorce filings, custody demands, subpoenas, and criminal complaints. Witnesses would later describe the moment his confidence faltered. the color draining from his face as he flipped through the pages. Vanessa's expression was one of shock, but for Caroline, it was the first taste of justice. Mitchell Royce, the firm Daniel had betrayed, wasted no time. Furious at his theft of clients and resources, they filed their own lawsuit against Clarke Hayes. Within days, court orders allowed security and auditors to storm Daniel's shiny new office, seizing files and freezing accounts. Clients abandoned him in droves, unwilling to be associated with a man facing scandal on every front. What was meant to be the rise of Clarke Hayes dissolved into chaos as both Daniel and Vanessa realized the empire they had built was crumbling beneath their feet. The final blow came when federal agents arrived. Cameras captured the moment as Daniel and Vanessa were led out of their office in handcuffs, reporters shouting questions over the chaos. The man who once adjusted his tie and smiled confidently for every camera was now shielding his face, shoved into the back of a black vehicle. The footage spread across every news outlet, replayed in slow motion as the story captured public outrage. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Emails, bank records, client testimonies, all laid bare for the jury. Vanessa Clarke, once so loyal, turned witness, testifying against Daniel to protect herself from a harsher sentence. The betrayal was complete, not just of Caroline but of Daniel's entire world. When the gavel struck, Daniel Hayes was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The courtroom buzzed with shock, but Caroline sat still, her children beside her, their small hands clutching hers. She had not shouted, she had not raged, she had simply let the truth speak, and the truth had destroyed him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing as Caroline held her children close. For the first time in years, she felt the air in her lungs was hers again. She looked at the faces of her children and knew that they would never again see their father as the untouchable man he had pretended to be. Daniel Hayes destroyed himself with his greed, his arrogance, and his betrayal. Caroline Hayes's only role was to make sure the world saw it happen. "He destroyed himself," she would later say. "I just made sure the world watched it happen." Daniel Hayes thought he had calculated the perfect escape. For years he believed he was smarter than everyone around him, that his charm and his lies would protect him from the truth. But betrayal breeds consequences, and for Daniel, the consequences stripped away everything he once valued. His career, the law license he had spent decades building, was gone. His fortune, the money he thought he could hide in secret accounts, vanished. His reputation, once polished and admired, was reduced to a headline about fraud and disgrace. Even his freedom, the very thing he took for granted, was ripped away when the judge handed down his sentence. He was left with nothing but the knowledge that the woman he tried to break was the same woman who rose stronger than he ever imagined. Caroline Hayes, the grieving daughter he underestimated, became the force that shattered his empire. She walked away with her children, not broken, but rebuilt, stronger, sharper, and free. And that leaves us with one question. Was this justice, or was it revenge? Before you go, tell us in the comments, if someone betrayed you at your weakest, would you destroy them, or rebuild stronger without them? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next story of betrayal and justice.